The secret research base hidden deep within the Dyson sphere was not exactly what Dr. Elowen Bryce had imagined when she signed up for groundbreaking scientific exploration. For starters, there was very little ground, mostly metal and lots of screens. She supposed the glossy brochure with its promises of shaping humanity's future hadn't been entirely misleading. She just hadn't expected it to look like a high-tech prison situated at the so-called arse end of the universe. Elowen sat at her desk, surrounded by a mess of electronic gadgets, half-eaten protein bars, and a coffee mug that read, "World's Archaeous Scientist," trying to ignore the fact that the mug was a gift from her ex-husband. Just as she was about to dive back into a report on nutrient synthesis, alarms blared like Judgment Day had arrived, but in space. "The hell now," she muttered to herself, shoving the mug aside and making her way to the control room where her team was gathered looking like confused penguins in lab coats. "Incoming transmission," said Rackham, her lead engineer, a man who'd once tried to fix a broken comm with duct tape. "It's, aliens. Aliens trying to call us. That's like getting a spam call from the void," Elowen said, rolling her eyes as she approached the main screen. On the screen flickered the image of a being who looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a very angry librarian. "This is Envoy Zizith Khan of the Glixnar Confederation," the alien said in a voice that sounded like it had gargled marbles. "Pleasure's all yours," Elowen replied dryly. "What brings you to our humble corner of metal and misery? We require your assistance," Zizith Khan continued, seemingly unfazed by sarcasm. "Our species faces a dire sustenance crisis. Our biospheres are failing and we seek your technological prowess." "Sure," Elowen said, nodding slowly. "Just let me grab my magic wand." Rackham smirked, whispering, "Magic wand science, same difference." Zizith Khan's holographic tendrils twitched impatiently. "We have heard of your universal sustenance project. We need a solution, quickly." Elowen sighed, crossing her arms. "Well, here's the thing, Zizith Khan. We've been working on synthetic nutrients to feed our own population, but it turns out your species has this little issue digesting Earth food. Apparently, what's gourmet for us is, toxic sludge for you." The jellyfish entity blinked, or whatever it did, its tendrils rippling in what might have been frustration or an impending sneeze. "This is unacceptable. Tell me about it," Elowen shrugged. "It's not like we set out to make food as deadly as our music." "Then what is your proposal?" Zizith Khan demanded, voice rising like an angry tide. "We'll need samples of your native flora and fauna," Elowen replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "And maybe a few of your people for testing purposes." "Testing purposes," Rackham echoed, eyebrows raised. "Hey, what they don't know won't hurt them," Elowen replied with a wink. "Except, unless it actually does." The alien envoy considered, its image fizzling slightly. "Very well, we will send a delegation." "Great," Elowen said, feigning enthusiasm. "We'll roll out the red carpet. Or maybe the gray one, seeing as our budget's tighter than a spacewalk suit." With that, the transmission ended, leaving the team in a tense silence. "So," Rackham said at last, "we're gonna save an alien race from starvation with food that might kill them. Seems like," Elowen said, clapping her hands together. Just another Tuesday in space. As the team dispersed, Elowen couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get complicated. But then, when was intergalactic diplomacy ever simple? Or, let's face it, remotely sane? Later, after some frantic organizing and what Elowen liked to call space diplomacy from the seat of your pants, a small craft from the Glixnar docked at the base. Elowen and Rackham stood in the bay, waiting for the delegation to disembark. "Ever met an alien before?" Rackham asked, fiddling with his tablet like it might do something useful. "Only in my nightmares," Elowen replied. "And I don't think they were here to negotiate." The ramp lowered with a whir, revealing two Glixnar envoys. They undulated awkwardly down the ramp, their forms shimmering in the artificial light. The first one, who introduced itself as Envoy Zylok, had a color palette reminiscent of a bad acid trip. "Welcome, welcome," Elowen said, putting on her best fake smile. "We have, snacks, somewhere." Zylock made a noise that might have been laughter. "Our thanks, Dr. Bryce. We hope our alliance will be mutually beneficial." "Oh, sure," Rackham chipped in, "as long as you don't mind us poking and prodding a bit. For science, of course." Elowen shot him a look. "Ignore him. We're all professionals here," she said, even as she struggled to suppress a smirk. "Follow me and we'll get you settled." As they made their way through the base, Zylock asked, "And you have solutions for our sustenance issue?" "In a manner of speaking," Elowen replied. "We've got ideas, which is really the same as solutions if you squint hard enough." The alien's silence was either contemplative or deeply worried. Hard to tell with jellyfish. "We've synthesized a few prototypes," Rackham said, gesturing to a lab crowded with equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and hope. "No promises, though." "That is acceptable," Zylock replied. "We appreciate any effort, no matter how feeble." Elowen smirked. "Feeble." "You've been reading my performance reviews, haven't you?" Rackham chuckled. "Only the good parts." Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly, or as tirelessly as a group of overcaffeinated scientists could manage. Elowen spent her time between labs and meetings, coordinating efforts with their gelatinous guests. "I could use a break," Rackham muttered one morning, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe a nice beach. Or a bar where nobody knows synthetic nutrient synthesis is a pickup line." "You and me both," Elowen replied, staring at a readout that made less sense than the plot of her favorite space opera. "But unless you know a shortcut out of the Dyson sphere, we're stuck here." Rackham sighed. "Right. Stuck in a metal ball trying to save the universe one alien at a time." "Pretty much," Elowen agreed, patting him on the shoulder. "But hey, at least we're not dead yet." As the days turned into weeks, progress was made, albeit slowly. The team had managed to create a compound that didn't immediately kill Glixnar test subjects, a small victory in the grand scheme. "It's not poison," Rackham announced triumphantly one afternoon, clutching a vial of their latest concoction. "High praise," Elowen replied, raising an eyebrow. "Let's hope it tastes better than it smells." The aliens, for their part, seemed cautiously optimistic. Envoy Zizith Khan expressed gratitude in its own peculiar way, through a series of gestures that might have been equivalent to a thumbs up. "We are impressed," Zizith Khan said, tendrils waving gently. "Your efforts have given us hope." "Hope's overrated," Elowen replied, crossing her arms. "But we'll take it." Rackham chuckled. "Hope and coffee, it's all we've got." Despite the hurdles, the project continued, with Elowen balancing the fine line between scientific progress and potential interstellar incident. She knew they were on borrowed time, but for now, they were holding their own. As she sat in her tiny office, staring at the stars through a small viewport, Elowen couldn't help but wonder how it would all end. Would their solution work, or would it be another cosmic joke with humanity as the punchline? "Well," she said to herself, raising her mug in a mock toast, "here's to not dying today." The universe had a funny way of keeping things interesting, and as alarms blared once more, indicating yet another crisis, Elowen knew she wouldn't have it any other way. The control room buzzed with the sort of frenetic energy only seen when a group of overworked, underslept scientists were thrust into a situation involving aliens and the potential extinction of a species, which, while not an everyday occurrence, was becoming disturbingly frequent for Dr. Elowen Bryce and her team. Rackham was elbow-deep in a panel of cables, attempting to coax some life into a particularly stubborn display. "You know, sometimes I think these screens are sentient," he muttered, wiping a smudge of grease from his nose. "And they're plotting against us." Elowen smirked. "If they are, they're doing a bang-up job. What's next?" "Toasters with a vendetta." Rackham chuckled darkly as Talon Vex, the team's unconventional engineer with a penchant for duct tape and questionable safety protocols, strolled in, sipping what passed for coffee in the Dyson sphere, essentially caffeinated tar. "You guys look chipper. What's the latest cosmic disaster? Just the usual, Eloan replied. We need to save an alien race from starvation, and so far our best solution is to feed them stuff that makes them projectile vomit. Vex raised an eyebrow. Efficient. Nothing like a bit of interstellar food poisoning to tighten those diplomatic ties. Exactly, Eloan said, dry as the Martian desert. Which is why we're here, knee-deep in alien biology, trying to make sure our next batch doesn't turn them inside out. At that moment, Lyra Sable, the biochemist who somehow managed to be both the most optimistic and most pessimistic person Eloan had ever met, entered the room. "I've got good news and bad news," she announced, clutching a data pad like it might bite her. "Let me guess," Eloan said, leaning back in her chair. "The good news is we've narrowed down the possible causes of death to only half of our samples." Lyra grimaced, the expression more like a forced smile. "Almost. The good news is that the latest batch of nutrient compounds didn't kill any test subjects." "And the bad news?" Rackham asked, not missing a beat. "They are in critical condition and experiencing what can only be described as explosive reactions," Lyra admitted, her voice laced with defeat. "So, essentially they're not dead, but they probably wish they were," Vex concluded, setting down his mug. "Fantastic. We're one step closer to not committing galactic manslaughter." Eloan rubbed her temples, the beginnings of a headache forming. "All right, folks, let's break this down. Lyra, what do we know about their digestive systems, besides them being a death trap for our cuisine?" "Well, their biology is weirdly similar to jellyfish, but with internal organs that react violently to complex proteins," Lyra explained, swiping through graphs and charts. "Think of it like trying to digest a nuclear reactor. The result is explosive." "Lovely," Rackham said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. "So we've established that Earth food is a no-go unless we want to start a new chapter of alien horror stories." "Pretty much," Lyra nodded. "We need to find something simpler, something that doesn't turn into napalm in their gut." Eloan sighed, her eyes darting to the viewport. "Well, let's hope the Glixnar can handle another round of food roulette. Otherwise, we're going to be the universe's most hated chefs." As if on cue, Envoy Zizith Khan's image crackled to life on the main screen. "Dr. Bryce," it intoned, voice like gravel rolled in a blender. "We have reviewed your latest findings. Our delegation is understandably concerned." "Concerned is an understatement," Eloan admitted, crossing her arms. "We're doing our best, but your biology is challenging." "You mean our digestive systems explode," Zizith Khan replied, not missing a beat. Eloan appreciated the envoy's bluntness. "Yes, exactly. We need more data on your natural diet. If we can understand what you eat, we can synthesize something similar." Zizith Khan's holographic form shimmered with what Eloan hoped was agreement. "Our delegation will provide the necessary data. We hope your next attempt will yield better results." "Me too," Eloan said, offering a genuine smile. "Otherwise, we're going to need a bigger mop." The transmission ended and Eloan turned back to her team. "All right, you heard the jellyfish. We need samples of their real food. Rackham, Vex, work on analyzing their biological data. Lyra, I want you to start on a synthesized compound that's less explosive." "On it," Lyra replied, already scrolling through her pad for any inkling of inspiration. As the team dispersed, Eloan couldn't help but feel the weight of their task pressing down on her like a malfunctioning gravity simulator. Saving an entire species was no small feat, especially when the method involved playing intergalactic chef with a recipe that might blow up in their faces, literally. "Another day in paradise," she muttered to herself, returning to her cluttered desk. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly, driven by an unspoken agreement that failure, while always an option, was not a pleasant one. Rackham and Vex pored over the alien biological data, their work punctuated by Vex's colorful commentary, and Rackham's grumbled threats about throwing the lot of it into the nearest star. "These guys eat stuff that's basically space algae," Vex said, pointing to a particularly unappetizing image on his tablet. No wonder they can't stomach a cheeseburger. Space algae, Rackham repeated, pinching the bridge of his nose. We're trying to feed algae to aliens. This is what my career has come to. Cheer up, Vex smirked. At least you can say you've expanded your culinary horizons. Meanwhile, Lyra ran experiments with the finesse of a chef performing a high-stakes cook-off, her tiny lab coated in samples that range from promising to deeply disappointing. "How's it going?" Eloan asked, dropping into the lab with the subtlety of a meteorite. "Well, we've got a few compounds that don't explode," Lyra said, setting down a vial with care. "But they also have the flavor profile of recycled cardboard," Eloan grimaced. "Delicious." "Exactly," Lyra replied, her tone dry. "And by delicious I mean we're screwed unless we get it right." "Keep at it," Eloan encouraged, patting Lyra on the shoulder. "We're the galaxy's finest. Or at least, we will be once we figure this out." As the team toiled, the Glixnar delegation provided more information on their diet, revealing a culinary landscape so bland it made boiled cabbage seem exotic. But it was a starting point, a glimmer of hope in the inky void. Finally, after weeks of trial and error, they hit a breakthrough. Rackham and Vex cobbled together a synthetic nutrient paste that, according to their tests, wouldn't cause any immediate biological fireworks. They called it Space Chow, which Vex insisted was both practical and marketable. "This is it," Lyra said, holding up the first batch with cautious optimism. "It's not much, but it might just work. Or it might not," Rackham added, never one to miss an opportunity for gallows humor. "But at least it's all natural, in the sense that nothing about it is natural." Eloan gathered the team in the control room, each member looking more like a zombie than a scientist. "All right, folks, this is the moment of truth. Let's hope we don't end up with an interstellar incident on our hands." The Glixnar test subjects were gathered, each looking more gelatinous than the last, and watched with something resembling hope in their eyes, assuming they had eyes. "We're ready," Eloan announced, nodding to Lyra, who handed the nutrient paste to the Glixnar. As they consumed the paste, the room held its collective breath, waiting for any sign of distress or, worse, the need to duck and cover. After what felt like an eternity, ZZ Khan's image flickered onto the screen. "Doctor, Bryce, your latest compound, how shall I put this? It hasn't killed us." Eloan let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Glad to hear it, Envoy ZZ Khan. Any other reactions we should know about?" ZZ Khan's tendrils quivered slightly. "It is nutritionally viable, though it seems to cause an odd sensation akin to bubbles in our core." "Bubbles?" Vex echoed, a lopsided grin tugging at his lips. "We just gave them space soda." "But they are okay," Lyra interjected, relief washing over her. "That's what matters." "Indeed," ZZ Khan agreed, its voice surprisingly warm. "With some refinement, this could be the solution we seek." Eloan nodded, a genuine smile breaking through her usual cynicism. "Then we'll get refining, but for now we'll celebrate this small victory." As ZZ Khan signed off, the team exchanged tired but triumphant looks. "Well," Rackham said, clapping a hand on Vex's shoulder. "We did it. We made interstellar baby food. And we didn't die in the process," Eloan added, raising an imaginary glass. "To small victories and not blowing up the universe today." The team laughed, their voices echoing through the metal halls of the Dyson sphere. For the first time in weeks, Eloan felt a sliver of satisfaction amidst the chaos. They'd done the impossible, and even if it was just one step, it was a step in the right direction. "Here's to tomorrow," she murmured, watching the stars twinkle like distant friends. "May it be just as insane." The Dyson sphere hummed with the comforting discomfort of its usual dysfunction. The place was a technological marvel in theory, but felt more like living inside a malfunctioning toaster. "Doctor." Eloan Bryce, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, reflected that it was at least better than the coffee. Barely. The team was gathered in the central lab, a mass of metal and screens that blinked and flickered like a bad light show. Rackham, the resident tech whisperer, was locked in a staring contest with the display screens, convinced they were conspiring against him. Alolan figured he might not be wrong. The screens had a knack for showing you exactly what you didn't want to see in the most inconvenient font possible. "So, what's on the agenda today, Chief?" Vex drawled, using a wrench as a pointer. "More alien culinary school," Alolan sighed, trying to smooth out the permanent frown creasing her forehead. "Besides ensuring we don't accidentally poison our jellyfish friends again." "I'd say solving world hunger, but let's start small," Rackham grunted, his fingers flying over the console with the precision of a man who'd spent far too many years trying to make malfunctioning tech do his bidding. "I'd settle for making the damn screens behave. Good luck with that." "I'd have better odds wrangling a star," Lyra said, entering with a tray full of what could charitably be called food. "Breakfast is served." "Or whatever this is." Vex peered at the tray, eyebrows shooting up. "Looks like yesterday's leftovers regurgitated by a black hole." Lyra flashed a grin, a mix of bright optimism and grim resignation. "Funny, that's exactly what the recipe said." Before anyone could partake in the culinary abomination, the lights flickered ominously. The Dyson sphere had all the reliability of a politician's promise. Alolan groaned. "Great, what now?" As if on cue, alarms blared, loud, obnoxious, and thoroughly insulting to anyone trying to maintain a shred of sanity. "Sabotage," Rackham muttered, staring at a new set of error messages that unfurled across the screens like an unwelcome guest. "Someone's been playing fast and loose with our systems." Vex's face split into a grin that was more wolf than anything reassuring. "Well, this just got interesting." "Who's the lucky saboteur? Wish I knew," Rackham said, tapping at the console. "But our systems are as secure as a sieve. I'm seeing unauthorized access logs all over the place." Alolan's jaw clenched as she surveyed the team. Trust was a precious commodity, and right now it felt like a rapidly depreciating currency. "All right, everyone. I need you to be straight with me. If anyone's been fiddling with the system, now's the time to confess before I start issuing airlock tours." No one moved, though Lyra looked like she might faint from the tension. "Not me. I wouldn't know how to sabotage anything beyond burning dinner." Vex, for his part, was the picture of innocence, if innocence came with a side of unconcealed mischief. "I'm more interested in duct tape than data sabotage." Rackham's frown deepened, the suspicion in his eyes directed at the screens rather than his colleagues. "It's got to be external. Someone's messing with us remotely and they're doing a damn good job." "Fantastic." "A ghost in the machine," Alolan muttered. "All right, Rackham, see if you can lock down the systems." "Lyra, Vex, check the lab and storage. Make sure nothing critical's been tampered with." The team dispersed with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine that desperately needed new parts. As Alolan paced the control room, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, unfriendly, unseen, and terribly amused. An hour later, Vex returned with bad news served on a platter. "We've got missing supplies," he announced, tossing a rather grimy clipboard on the table. "Someone's been helping themselves to our stock." Alolan picked up the clipboard, noting the missing items: basic rations, a few tools, and oddly enough a box of hairnets. "Hairnets? We're being sabotaged by a health inspector or someone who really likes tidy hair," Vex quipped. "Either way, it's not your usual smash and grab." Rackham's voice crackled over the intercom. "I've managed to trace some of the unauthorized access." "It's coming from within the sphere." "Of course it is," Alolan said, rubbing her temples. "Because nothing can ever be simple." "Has anyone taken a head count lately?" "All accounted for," Lyra reported, emerging from the storage room looking like she'd been through a war zone. "No extra bodies, but plenty of missing bits and bobs." Alolan felt her patience wearing thinner than a budget-friendly spacesuit. "All right, people, looks like we've got a mystery saboteur on our hands. Let's double-check all security feeds and see if we can catch our guest star on film." As they combed through the grainy footage, the room fell into a tense silence. The cameras showed little more than flickering lights and shadows that seemed to mock their efforts. Whoever was behind this, they were good, too good. Vex leaned back, a gleam of bemusement in his eyes. "Well, at least they're neat about it. The place looks tidier than before." Not helping, Aloan said, though she couldn't help but crack a smile. If this keeps up, we'll be out of supplies before we run out of patience. Or sanity, Rackham added, his fingers tapping a furious rhythm on the console. I'm locking down the rest of the systems. Let's see how they like that. But the universe, in its infinite wisdom, had other plans. The lights flickered again, and the alarms resumed their ear-splitting chorus. It was starting to feel like a cosmic joke, and Aloan wasn't laughing. Looks like someone's not a fan of lockdowns, Lyra noted, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. Or they have a different idea of fun, Rackham muttered, his eyes scanning the screens. They're trying to access the research data now. Aloan's heart sank. If their research was compromised, it wouldn't just be their careers at stake. It'd be an entire race. Focus on that, Rackham. We can't let them get at the data, even as Rackham barricaded their digital doors with whatever cyber fortifications he could muster. Aloan knew they were on borrowed time. Whoever was behind this was relentless, and she had a creeping suspicion that they weren't just after food and hairnets. Hours later, as they regrouped in the lab, the team looked more like survivors of a bad sci-fi horror than scientists. Aloan surveyed their weary faces, knowing morale was circling the drain. "All right, people, we're not out of this yet," she said, trying to inject some steel into her voice. "We've got a saboteur missing supplies and a bunch of aliens depending on us not to screw up. Any ideas? Fix the security leaks, kick the saboteur in the teeth, and hope for a miracle." Vex suggested, half joking, half serious. "Miracles are for the desperate," Rackham retorted. "I'd settle for not getting spaced." "Well, we've got to do something," Lyra said, the tremor in her voice betraying her nerves. "We're running out of time." Aloan nodded, knowing she couldn't afford to let despair win. "Then let's focus on finding this saboteur and protecting the data. We'll search every inch of this tin can if we have to." Rackham stood, determination etched into his features. "I'll start with the security logs again, see if there's anything we missed." "I'll check the air ducts," Vex said, grabbing his trusty wrench. "Never know what might be crawling around in there. Please don't find anything alive," Lyra said, a shudder running through her. "I've had my fill of surprises today." As the team dispersed once more, Aloan took a moment to stare out the viewport. The stars were as distant and uncaring as ever, a reminder of just how small and insignificant they truly were in the grand scheme of things. But for now, this tiny corner of the universe was all that mattered, and she'd be damned if she let it slip away into chaos. It was Vex who stumbled upon the first real clue, hidden away in the labyrinthine tunnels that crisscrossed the sphere. "Found something interesting," he announced, his voice crackling over the intercom. "Looks like someone set up a little hideout down here." Aloan's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of hideout?" "The kind with our missing supplies and a whole lot of tech I can't make heads or tails of," Vex replied. "I'm sending coordinates now." As the team converged on Vex's location, Aloan felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. They were close, but the truth might not be what they expected. The hideout was a mess of wires, screens, and equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together by a mad scientist, or in this case, a determined saboteur. But the most intriguing thing was the data stream running through a makeshift console, one that seemed eerily familiar. "Could be another faction," Rackham mused, fingers tracing the data stream. "Or someone really paranoid." Aloan crossed her arms, the weight of the mystery settling on her shoulders. "But why target us? We're just a bunch of scientists trying to help." "Maybe they don't like helping," Vex suggested, crouching near a pile of wires. "Or maybe they want to help themselves first." As they sifted through the hideout's contents, Aloan knew they were inches away from answers, or more questions. Either way, the stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking louder than ever. "Let's bag and tag everything here," she ordered, determination flaring anew. "We're going to get to the bottom of this if it's the last thing we do." As the team set to work, a thought nagged at the back of her mind. The saboteur was still out there, watching, waiting. And Aloan had a feeling their problems were far from over. Dr. Aloan Bryce stood staring at the mess of wires and equipment. reminiscent of a toddler's attempt to build a spaceship out of spaghetti and hope. Her mind was racing faster than Rackham's fingers on a malfunctioning console. The sabotage was just one more wrinkle in a fabric that was already threadbare. "All right, here's the deal," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a rusty blade. "We need to synthesize a hybrid food source for the Glixnar. We've got the tech and the know-how, but we're short on everything else. Ideas." Rackham, never one to miss a chance for sarcasm, snorted. "How about we tap dance for the Dyson sphere and hope it showers us with resources?" Vex, who'd been busy poking at a suspicious-looking contraption, chimed in. "Or we could just pray to the gods of interstellar screw-ups. Maybe they'll take pity on us." Lyra, ever the reluctant optimist, sighed. "We could try using the algae samples from the last survey. It's not much, but it might work as a base." Elowen nodded, her expression grim. "Algae it is, then. We'll have to make do with what we've got. But let's not kid ourselves, this is a Hail Mary if ever there was one." Rackham raised an eyebrow. "And if it doesn't work? Then we can add causing an intergalactic famine to our list of accomplishments," Elowen replied dryly. "Let's get to it." The lab was a flurry of activity, each team member juggling their tasks like clowns in a particularly bleak circus. Elowen and Lyra focused on the biochemistry, trying to coax something edible out of the algae. Meanwhile, Vex and Rackham were up to their elbows in wires and circuitry, trying to fix the sphere's mood swings. "Pass me that wrench, would you?" Vex said, gesturing vaguely at a tool that had seen better days. Rackham obliged, though not without a parting shot. "You know, for an engineer, you have a rather intimate relationship with duct tape." Vex grinned, not missing a beat. "Hey, if it works, it works. Besides, it's the only thing holding this place together." Elowen, trying not to let the absurdity of their situation overwhelm her, chimed in. "Let's just hope the Glixnar aren't allergic to duct tape." Lyra, doing her best to maintain focus amidst the banter, shook her head. "I'd laugh if it wasn't so depressingly true." Hours ticked by, the team wrestling with the stubborn reality of their resource limitations. With each passing moment, the pressure mounted, the weight of an entire species' survival pressing down like the boot of a particularly sadistic cosmic overlord. Finally, Lyra let out a triumphant, albeit exhausted, sigh. "I think we've got something. It doesn't look like much, but it should be safe." Elowen peered at the pale green concoction, skepticism etched into every line of her face. "It looks like something that crawled out of a swamp and decided to die on this table." "Appetizing," Vex remarked, wrinkling his nose. "Hope the Glixnar have low standards." "High stakes, low standards," Rackham quipped. "Sounds like my last job." They shared a brief, much-needed laugh, tiny victories amidst the chaos. Elowen pressed forward, her resolve hardening. "All right, let's get this stuff tested. If it passes, we need to prepare a batch large enough to make a difference." As they set about their tasks, the tension was palpable. Elowen knew they were playing a high-stakes game with borrowed cards. One wrong move, and they'd be facing more than just an angry email from the Glixnar Confederation. Midway through the testing, the Dyson sphere decided it hadn't been enough of a nuisance, and helpfully provided another round of flickering lights and wailing alarms. "For crying out loud," Rackham grumbled, scrambling to stop the sphere from having another existential crisis. "It's like living inside a damn haunted house." Elowen, feeling the frustration inching dangerously close to her threshold, barked an order. "Vex, check the power relays. Lyra, keep an eye on the cultures. I swear, if this thing decides to implode while we're in here, at least we won't have to worry about the alien famine anymore," Vex shot back, a darkly humorous glint in his eyes. The team worked with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The energy of the room was electric, each member well aware that their margin for error was about as wide as a slice of paper. It was Lyra who broke the silence, her voice a mix of hope and fear. "The cultures are stable. We might have a working prototype." Elowen moved over, scrutinizing the data with the intensity of a gambler eyeing their last chip. "It'll have to do." Rackham, ever the realist, wasn't quite convinced. "And if the Glixnar don't like it?" Then we keep trying, Aloan replied, her tone brokering no argument. We didn't come this far to give up now. The next challenge was scaling up production. The sphere's erratic behavior meant they had to be creative, an endeavor akin to teaching a cat to fetch. Looks like we'll have to jury-rig something, Vex muttered, eyeing the collection of parts with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Ad hoc engineering at its finest, Aloan said, forcing a smile. Let's just hope it doesn't blow up in our faces. Lyra, ever the voice of cautious optimism, chimed in. At least we know what not to do next time. The Iors bled together as they worked, each success tempered by the knowledge that failure was still lurking, a vulture waiting for its moment to strike. In a rare moment of quiet, Aloan found herself standing alone, staring out at the stars once more. The universe stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of darkness and light. It was a humbling view, one she found both comforting and terrifying in equal measure. She turned back to her team, her voice low but resolute. We're going to make this work, not because it's easy or because we want to, but because we have to. Rackham nodded, his expression one of grim determination. Failure's not an option, not unless you want to explain it to the Glixnar, Vex added, the corners of his mouth twitching into a grin. And I'd rather take my chances with an airlock. Lyra chuckled, shaking her head. Leave it to us to find humor in a no-win scenario. As the team resumed their work, Aloan knew they were racing against the clock. The stakes were higher than they'd ever faced, but she had faith in her team. They were smart, resourceful, and just crazy enough to pull this off. And in the end, what more could you ask for in a universe hell-bent on testing your limits? The next day dawned, or at least, the artificial lights simulated a dawn, on a scene of frenzied activity. The team had cobbled together a makeshift production line that looked about as stable as a tower of cards in a windstorm. Well, Vex said, surveying their handiwork with a critical eye, if this doesn't work, at least it'll be spectacular. Famous last words, Rackham muttered, fingers crossed metaphorically and literally as he powered up the system. The machinery groaned to life with all the enthusiasm of a retiree being dragged to a dance class. But despite its age, it worked, churning out the algae-based concoction in what they hoped was a palatable form. Lyra, testing the first batch, scrunched her nose. It smells like old gym socks. Better than nothing, Aloan replied, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. As the process continued, Envoy Zethcon's voice crackled over the comms, a reminder of the stakes. Dr. Bryce, how proceeds the sustenance? Aloan paused, choosing her words as carefully as a diplomat with a hangover. We're making progress, Envoy. I believe you'll be satisfied with the results. Satisfaction is a relative term, Doctor. We prefer survival. Don't we all? Rackham muttered under his breath, earning a smirk from Vex. The team continued, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion as they fought to meet the Glixnar's deadline. Iors blended into a haze of caffeine and determination, their efforts fueled by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they had enough of the hybrid food to send to the Glixnar. It was a tense moment, one fraught with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for guilty verdicts and sporting events. Aloan took a deep breath, nodding to Rackham. Send it. Rackham's fingers flew over the console, and with a final keystroke, the shipment was on its way. Hope they like it, or at least don't hate it, Lyra added, her smile thin but genuine. The wait was torture, the minutes slipping by with all the grace of a herd of elephants on a tightrope. Each tick of the clock was a reminder of the precarious balance they were trying to maintain. Then the comms crackled to life once more, Zethcon's voice as inscrutable as ever. The sustenance has been received. We will test it shortly. Aloan nodded, though she knew the envoy couldn't see her. Keep us updated. Of course, Doctor, we anticipate favorable results. As the connection ended, the team exchanged glances, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Well, Vex said, breaking the silence, guess now we wait. Rackham leaned back, exhaustion etched into his features. We've done all we can. Lyra glanced around, a hint of pride in her eyes. No matter what happens, we gave it our best shot. Elowen nodded, her expression firm. And that's all anyone can ask for. They sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of what they'd achieved hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The path ahead was uncertain, but they'd faced the darkness together. And that, Elowen thought, was something worth holding onto. Because in the end, it wasn't just about the Glixnar or the Dyson sphere or even the saboteur lurking in the shadows. It was about them, this ragtag group of scientists and engineers, fighting against impossible odds with nothing more than their wits and a bit of duct tape. And if that wasn't hope, then Elowen didn't know what was. The Dyson sphere's lights flickered like a dying firefly, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt circuitry and desperation. As if the universe wasn't already having a good laugh at their expense, the hybrid food prototype decided to throw a tantrum worthy of a spoiled toddler. Elowen was the first to spot the warning lights, glowing ominously on the control panel like a neon sign for impending doom. Guys, we've got a problem." Rakim, who was elbow-deep in a console trying to coax it back to life, looked up with a resigned sigh. "What now? Did the Dyson sphere decide to develop a conscience and leave us for a better offer?" "Not quite," Elowen replied, squinting at the readout. "We've got a breach in the containment unit. The prototype's going haywire." Vex, who had been fiddling with some duct tape as if it were a magic wand, froze. "Define haywire, because if it's anything like last time, I vote we start running." Lyra, who had been optimistically attempting to keep a plant alive in the corner, glanced over her shoulder. "Running where? We're in a floating tin can with nowhere to go." "That's like trying to run away from an existential crisis." As if on cue, the alarms blared to life, a cacophony of sound that could only mean one thing: catastrophic failure. The lights dimmed, and the whir of machinery ground to a halt, leaving nothing but the echo of their collective groans of despair. Elowen slammed her fist down on the comms console, which, in a rare moment of cooperation, managed to beep out a half-hearted signal. "Envoy Zethcon, we've had a minor," the comms crackled, interrupting in its usual unhelpful fashion. "Minor, Dr. Bryce. Define minor." "Minor in the sense that we haven't exploded yet," Rakim chimed in, not missing a beat. The envoy's voice took on a tone that was somehow both amused and threatening. "Please, rectify the situation." "Easy for him to say," Vex muttered, giving the tangled mess of wires a hard stare, as if intimidation might somehow fix it. Elowen took a deep breath, trying to find that elusive blend of calm and resolve that leaders were supposed to have in moments of crisis. "All right, no one's getting out of here until we fix this. Vex, can you patch the breach?" Vex scratched his chin, looking at the tools scattered around him with the same affection one might reserve for a particularly stubborn pet. "I can try, but we're out of half the parts we need and the other half are more fried than my Aunt Petunia after a night on the town." "Sounds promising," Lyra said, her voice laced with a sardonic edge. The team sprang into action, or at least shuffled with a sense of purpose. They moved like ghosts through the labyrinth of equipment, each aware of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. The air was heavy with tension, every clank and beep a reminder of how precarious their situation had become. Rakim was cursing in a manner that suggested he had a personal vendetta against the universe itself. "Every damn time we get close to a breakthrough, it's like the cosmos decides to kick us in the teeth." Elowen couldn't help but agree, though out loud she said, "We'll get through this. We've come back from worse." "I don't know," Vex said, gesturing at the sparking console. "This looks pretty bad, like angry mother-in-law level bad." Lyra winced, her optimism cracking under the weight of reality. "And here I was, hoping today would be the day we didn't screw up royally." "Screwing up is basically our brand at this point," Rakim shot back. "Might as well embrace it." As they worked, the breach alarm continued its relentless wail, a reminder of their ticking clock. The breach was isolating them from the rest of the base, and with resources dwindling, their options were about as appetizing as a tofu burger at a barbecue. "Okay, I've got something," Vex said finally, holding up a tangled mess of wires and circuits. "This won't hold for long, but it'll buy us some time." Eloan took the makeshift contraption, eyeing it with a mix of hope and skepticism. "Let's hope the Glixnar don't find out about this. They might decide starvation's the better option." With the breach temporarily patched, the team regrouped, their faces worn by stress and exhaustion. They were like travelers in a desert, chasing mirages with no oasis in sight. "So what's next?" Lyra asked, her voice weary but determined. "Now we figure out how to keep this thing from blowing up in our faces," Eloan replied, glancing at the remaining equipment. "Rackham, see if you can stabilize the power flow." Rackham nodded, though his expression was one of a man asked to juggle chainsaws blindfolded. "Sure, I'll just wave my magic tech wand and hope for the best." "The usual then," Vex added, earning a tired chuckle from the group. As they worked, the weight of their task settled over them like a shroud. Every movement was measured, every decision scrutinized, as they fought against the creeping doubt that threatened to derail their progress. "How did we end up here?" Lyra wondered aloud, her voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. "Because we're the best," Rackham replied, his sarcasm cutting through the gloom. "Or at least the best available." "Comforting," Lyra said, though her smile was genuine. They labored on in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they wrestled with the enormity of their task. The Dyson sphere's walls seemed to close in around them, a metal cocoon that offered no solace. Finally, with the breach temporarily stabilized and the alarm silenced, they collapsed into chairs, each aware that their victory was as fragile as a soap bubble. It was a moment of calm amidst a storm that threatened to drown them at any second. But for now, they'd managed to patch the breach, and that was a victory no matter how small. Eloan looked around at her team, the people who had stood by her side through thick and thin, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time: hope. "Great job, everyone," she said, her voice carrying a note of pride. "We've still got a mountain to climb, but we've taken the first step." Rackham raised an imaginary glass. "To surviving another day." Lyra and Vex echoed the sentiment, and for a moment the weight of their situation lifted. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they'd found a path through the darkness, and that was worth celebrating. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic activity as they worked to shore up their makeshift fixes and prepare for whatever came next. Their isolation from the rest of the base added an extra layer of difficulty, but they'd faced worse odds before. Eloan's mind was a whirlwind of plans and contingencies, each one more desperate than the last. But as long as they kept moving forward, she knew they'd find a way through. They had to. "All right," she said, rallying the team once more. "Let's get back to it. We've got a universe to save, after all." Rackham groaned, though there was a twinkle in his eye. No pressure or anything. As they returned to their stations, the reality of their situation hit home. They were a ragtag band of misfits, fighting against impossible odds with nothing more than their wits and a bit of luck. But if there was one thing Eloan had learned, it was that hope could be found in the darkest of places. And in the end, that was all they needed. Because no matter how bleak the future seemed, they weren't alone. They had each other, and in a universe full of chaos and uncertainty, that was a power no force could take away. And with that thought in mind, Eloan prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to fight for the survival of a species and the future of everything they held dear. "All right, let's see what's left in the bag of tricks," Talon Vex muttered, his voice a blend of frustration and forced optimism as he surveyed the sorry state of their remaining equipment. The Dyson sphere sulked in the background, flickering lights casting shadows that danced like conspirators plotting their demise. "Lucky us," Rackham added, yanking a cable from its socket with all the delicacy of a bear trying to knit. "We've got less working tech than a caveman's toolkit." Eloan rubbed her temples, the pressure building to a crescendo that threatened to split her skull. Let's remember we're the ones trying to stop an entire species from going the way of the dodo, so, no pressure. Vex snorted. Today's order of business. Not dying and maybe, just maybe, not letting the Glixnar think we're the ones who turned their food supply into a toxic waste dump. Lyra, ever the bright spot of the crew, waved a small device in the air. Speaking of which, I've run another test on the hybrid food prototype. And? Elowen prompted, bracing for the inevitable bad news. Does it scream death wish when you look at it funny? Lyra sighed dramatically, lowering the device as if it had personally offended her. It's not ideal. The biochemical reactions are still volatile. Think of it like mixing Mentos and soda, a spectacle sure, but not exactly what we want. Great, Rackham said, his sarcasm so thick you could spread it on toast. So we're still at explosive diarrhea on the scale of dietary disasters. Vex scratched his head, his gaze fixed on an alien console with an intensity that suggested he might be willing it to explode. Hey, Lyra, you remember those envoy guys from the Glixnar? The ones who somehow managed to look both slimy and condescending at the same time. How could I forget? Lyra replied, wincing at the memory. Their greetings are like being slapped with a wet fish, polite but unpleasant. Yeah, well, it got me thinking, Vex continued, his eyes narrowing as his brain kicked into high gear. What if we're missing something in their biochemistry, something that could stabilize the damn prototype? Rackham rolled his eyes so hard you could almost hear them click. Oh sure, let's just say abracadabra and fix the unfixable. Easy? Elowen raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued despite herself. What are you getting at, Vex? Vex grinned, that reckless glint in his eye that usually meant trouble. When we were with them, I remember scanning one of the envoys for background data. Might be a wild goose chase, but I think I picked up something odd, an enzyme or something that might just be the missing piece. Lyra's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in their depths. Are you serious? If we can isolate it, that could stabilize the hybrid food and make it safe. Safe-ish, Rackham interjected. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right, Elowen said, grabbing onto this thin thread of possibility like a lifeline. Let's dig through Vex's scan data. If there's even a whisper of a chance we can turn this around, we have to try. They dove into the data like scavengers on a carcass, eyes glued to flickering screens as they sifted through lines of code and biological readouts. It was a mess of numbers and strange symbols that made Rackham mutter darkly about needing a degree in alien hieroglyphics. Found it, Vex shouted, a triumphant grin splitting his face. There's a unique enzyme structure here, something that looks like it could stabilize the reaction in the hybrid food. You're sure? Lyra asked, her voice tinged with incredulity. Vex shrugged. As sure as I am that I'm probably going to die fixing this damn machine. Elowen clapped her hands, a rare smile breaking through the tension. All right, team, let's get cracking. We isolate that enzyme, figure out how to synthesize it, and then we make this hybrid food work. Rackham snorted. And if not, we can always open a restaurant, Kaboom Cuisine, for those who like their meals with a side of danger. With renewed energy, they split into smaller groups, each member focusing on their part of the plan. Rackham dove into the technical details, coaxing every last drop of power from the failing systems to keep the data coming. Lyra and Elowen concentrated on the biochemistry, poring over models and simulations until their eyes blurred with fatigue. Vex, meanwhile, took to the task of jury-rigging a setup to test their new hypothesis. Just remember, he said, holding up a roll of duct tape like a talisman, if it moves and it shouldn't, duct tape. Words to live by, Rackham replied, his tone conveying the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared near-death experiences. As the hours wore on, the atmosphere in the lab shifted from one of impending doom to a more tentative optimism. It was the kind of hope that came with a side order of skepticism, served on a bed of sarcasm but hope nonetheless. Okay, we've isolated the enzyme, Lyra announced, her finger tracing the structure on the screen. Now we just need to synthesize it and introduce it to the hybrid food prototype without blowing ourselves up. Vex stepped forward, ready to work his particular brand of magic. Let me handle that. You know how much I love playing with unstable biological compounds. Eloan watched Vex work, hands deftly assembling a makeshift synthesizer from parts that had seen better days. It was a bit like watching a magician at work, albeit one who was just as likely to saw himself in half as he was to pull a rabbit from a hat. Rackham leaned back in his chair, stretching muscles that had long since protested their treatment. You know, if this works, we might actually survive long enough to get yelled at by the Glixnar for a change. Hey, life's all about those small victories, Eloan replied, her tone wry but affectionate. The hours ticked by, each moment fraught with the possibility of disaster. They worked tirelessly, the gravity of their situation pressing down on them like a physical weight. But amidst the stress and chaos, they found a rhythm, a shared purpose that kept them moving forward even when the odds were stacked against them. Finally, Vex stepped back from his workbench, the synthesized enzyme held delicately in a vial. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if our Glixnar buddies are going to starve or feast. Lyra took the vial, her hand steady despite the tension thrumming through her body. Here goes nothing, she murmured, adding the enzyme to the hybrid food prototype with a level of care usually reserved for diffusing bombs. There was a pause, a moment of agonizing silence where the universe seemed to hold its breath. And then slowly, the prototype began to stabilize, the once volatile reaction smoothing out into something that might just resemble a viable food source. Holy hell, Rackham whispered, disbelief etched in every line of his face. Did we actually do it? Looks like it, Eloan said, her voice a mix of awe and relief. We've got a long way to go, but this is something. Vex, ever the realist, crossed his arms and smirked. Well, it's not exploding. That's a start. The mood in the room shifted, the oppressive weight of impending failure lifting, if only slightly. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, Eloan cautioned, though her eyes shone with a light that hadn't been there before. We've got to run more tests, make sure this is stable enough to present to the Glixnar. Yeah, Rackham said with a wave of his hand. Let's bask in our almost success before the universe decides to kick us again. Lyra chuckled, the sound bright and unexpected. I'd say we deserve it. Vex, ever the pragmatist, tapped his fingers on the table. All right, let's get back to work. This thing isn't going to stabilize itself completely without some more elbow grease. They returned to their tasks, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose. It was the sort of determination that came not just from necessity, but from a glimmer of belief in what they could achieve together. As they worked, testing and recalibrating, they shared stories and jokes, the camaraderie lightening the atmosphere. It was a rare moment of levity in a universe that seemed determined to grind them into dust. Rackham paused, a rare smile tugging at his lips. You know, I think we might just pull this off. Don't jinx it, Eloan warned, though her tone was more playful than stern. The moment we start thinking we're invincible is the moment everything goes to hell. Spoken like someone who's been through the ringer, Vex quipped, his grin infectious. The hours stretched into the night, or what passed for night in the endless cycle of the Dyson sphere. Each member of the team worked tirelessly, their focus unwavering despite the odds. It was the kind of dedication that came from knowing they were all in this together, a ragtag group of misfits fighting for survival against a universe that seemed intent on tearing them apart. Finally, with the prototype stable and the enzyme successfully integrated, they took a moment to breathe, their exhaustion mingling with a sense of accomplishment. Eloan looked around at her team, a swell of pride rising in her chest. We've done good work here. We're not at the finish line yet, but we've made progress. Vex nodded, his expression serious for once. Yeah, and if we can keep this up, we might just have a shot at pulling this off. Rackham leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief, stolen moment of rest. Here's hoping the universe doesn't decide to rain on our parade. Or at least waits until we've had a chance to bask in our temporary glory, Lyra added, her smile weary but genuine. They sat together, sharing the silence and savoring the small victory they'd earned. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to keep them moving forward. And for now, that was all they needed. The lab buzzed with the kind of barely contained chaos you might expect from a bunch of humans trying to save a species on the brink of starvation, all while avoiding blowing themselves up in the process. It was like trying to juggle angry cats while blindfolded and standing on a pogo stick. Impressive if you could pull it off, but mostly just insane. "The enzyme's holding," Lyra reported, staring intently at her screen as if sheer force of will could keep things stable. "For now, at least." "That's the spirit," Rackham said, not looking up from his own console. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst, and expect to get screwed anyway." Vex fiddled with the hybrid food prototype, adjusting dials and muttering to himself like a mad scientist in a low-budget horror flick. "If this thing doesn't go kaboom, I might actually start believing in miracles." "Let's not get too optimistic," Elowen chimed in, her eyes flicking between the various displays that seemed designed specifically to ruin her day. "The universe has a way of punishing hubris." Just then, a familiar, smug voice crackled over the comms. "Ah, my favorite humans. How is the noble quest for dietary salvation progressing?" Envoy Zizithkhan's voice dripped with amusement, as if the whole situation was just one big cosmic joke, and they were the punchline. Not the kind of support you crossed light years for, but here they were. "We're managing," Elowen replied, her tone as diplomatic as she could muster. "Though I'd like to think it's more of a triumph over adversity rather than a mere quest." "Triumph. Adversity. Sounds like you humans are in your element then," Zizith Khan purred, clearly enjoying himself far too much. As the envoy's voice faded, Rackham snorted. "I swear if smugness could be weaponized, we'd all be dead." "Still," Lyra said, tapping another command into her console, "we should be grateful. At least the Glixnar aren't trying to eat us." "Yet," Vex added, never one to let a moment go undarkened. Elowen glanced around, feeling a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. They were making progress, the prototype was stable, and hell hadn't yet broken loose. But something gnawed at the edge of her mind, a tiny doubt that refused to be quieted. "Team," she said, pulling them from their tasks with the insistence of a parent trying to herd cats, "I can't shake the feeling that there's more going on here than bad luck and failing tech." Rackham leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You mean besides the universe's general disdain for our existence?" "Yeah, besides that," Elowen replied, smirking despite herself. "The sabotage, the malfunctions, it's too consistent to be random." Vex gave a low whistle. "You think someone's actively trying to screw us over?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Lyra muttered, frowning at her screen as if it had personally offended her. Elowen nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. "We need to find out who and why before we end up on the wrong side of a cosmic joke." "Good luck with that," Rackham said, though there was a spark of determination behind his sarcasm. "The list of people who'd love to see us fail isn't exactly short." "Exactly," Elowen agreed, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "But if we can outsmart them, we might just turn the tables." The team set to work, their earlier camaraderie tempered by a new sense of urgency. As they combed through data logs and communications records, a pattern began to emerge, a subtle manipulation of systems and information that pointed to a coordinated effort to sabotage their mission. "Looks like we've got ourselves a mole," Vex said, scanning through the tangled mess of evidence they'd pieced together. Rackham let out a low growl, a sound that promised retribution. "And here I was hoping for an easy day." "Do we ever get easy days?" Lyra asked, her tone dry as Martian dust. Elowen tapped her fingers on the table, the rhythm matching the beat of her racing heart. "If we can expose them, we can shift the blame away from us and show the Glixnar that we're not the problem." assuming they don't just decide we're a convenient scapegoat, Vex pointed out, ever the realist. But if we play this right, Elo countered, we could not only save the Glixnar but solidify our alliance. With that, the team dove back into their work, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. The air hummed with tension, every keystroke and whispered calculation a step toward uncovering the truth. As the Iors ticked by, they teased out the saboteurs' trail like a thread unraveling from a sweater. It wasn't easy. Whoever was behind this knew how to cover their tracks, but the team was relentless, their stubbornness as much a part of their nature as breathing. "Got it," Lyra exclaimed, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "It's an alien faction trying to destabilize the Alliance by making us look like incompetent fools." "Joke's on them," Rackham muttered. "We don't need help looking incompetent." Eloan grinned, feeling a surge of vindication. "Let's see how they like it when their little game gets turned on its head." Using the collected evidence, they crafted a plan to expose the saboteurs, leveraging the very systems that had been used against them. It was risky. Hell, it was borderline suicidal. But if it worked, they'd not only save the Glixnar but prove to the universe that humans were more than just stubborn apes. "All right, folks," Vex said, his hands poised over the controls like a concert pianist preparing for a final performance. "Let's give them a show." With a flourish that would have made any magician proud, Vex triggered the sequence, setting off a chain reaction that revealed the saboteurs' interference in all its glory. The displays lit up like fireworks, a cascade of information that left no doubt as to who was behind the sabotage. It was beautiful in a twisted kind of way, a testament to human ingenuity and the kind of creativity that thrived in the face of impossible odds. "There," Eloan said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "Now let's see them try to talk their way out of that." The comms console crackled to life, and Zethcon's voice rang out, a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "Well played, humans. It seems you've outmaneuvered our little problem." Eloan couldn't help but smile, the tension that had wrapped around her chest loosening for the first time in days. "Just another day at the office," she replied, her tone light but edged with steel. Rackham leaned back, his expression one of hard-earned triumph. "Maybe now we can get back to the whole saving a species thing without worrying about getting stabbed in the back." "Let's not get too complacent," Lyra cautioned, though her relief was palpable. "There's still plenty that could go wrong." "True," Vex admitted, "but at least we know who's wearing the black hat." With the saboteurs exposed and the threat neutralized, the team turned their attention back to the hybrid food prototype, their earlier success bolstered by this unexpected victory. It wasn't over yet. There were still tests to run, adjustments to make, but the path ahead was clearer than it had been for weeks. As they worked, the mood shifted once more, the oppressive weight of doubt replaced by a hard-won confidence. They'd been tested and had come through the fire stronger, more united than before. Rackham glanced up, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You know, I think we might actually pull this off." Lyra chuckled, the sound bright and infectious. "Don't jinx it." "Spoken like someone who's been through the ringer," Vex quipped, echoing Eloan's earlier warning. The Iors stretched into what passed for night in the Dyson sphere, the team working tirelessly to perfect the hybrid food. It was the kind of dedication that came from knowing they were all in this together, a ragtag group of misfits fighting for a future that seemed just out of reach. Finally, with the prototype stable and the enzyme successfully integrated, they sat back, allowing themselves a moment to breathe, to savor their hard-earned victory. Eloan looked around at her team, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "We've done good work here. We're not at the finish line yet, but we've made progress." Vex nodded, his expression serious for once. "Yeah, and if we can keep this up, we might just have a shot at pulling this off." Rackham leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief, stolen moment of rest. "Here's hoping the universe doesn't decide to rain on our parade. Or at least waits until we've had a chance to bask in our temporary glory," Lyra added, her smile weary but genuine. They sat together, sharing the silence and savoring the small victory they'd earned. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to keep them moving forward. And for now, that was all they needed. As the dust settled on their recent triumph, the team found themselves in the kind of lull that felt more dangerous than any crisis. The Dyson sphere's erratic flickering took on a gentler, almost soothing rhythm, as if the universe itself had decided to take five. Or maybe it was just waiting for the perfect moment to drop the other shoe. So, we've got alien allies and a functioning prototype. What next? Vex asked, leaning against a control panel that had miraculously decided to stop showing error messages every 5 seconds. Rackham shrugged, his eyes half closed. I say we milk this rare moment of not being totally screwed for all it's worth. Oh, don't worry. I'm sure the universe is just reloading, Lyra quipped, swiping through her display with the kind of practiced skepticism that came from too many close calls. Dr. Eloan Bryce, the team's reluctant ringleader, watched them with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Her fingers drummed a restless beat on the console, a habit she'd picked up during one of their countless all-nighters. We've done some good work here, but let's not get too comfortable. If history's taught us anything, it's that the cosmos loves a good curveball, or a sucker punch, Rackham muttered, cracking open one eye to glare at the still flickering lights. I swear, if we could harness the power of cosmic spite, we'd solve our energy problems overnight. Sure, and maybe we can turn cynicism into a renewable resource while we're at it, Lyra added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Hey, if sarcasm could power the Dyson sphere, we'd be golden, Vex chimed in, flashing a grin that was more teeth than humor. Their banter was interrupted by the comms console, crackling to life like an old man clearing his throat. Envoy Zethcon's voice slid through the static, as smug as ever. I trust your recent success has not inflated your egos too much, dear humans. Eloan rolled her eyes, a gesture that had become second nature whenever Zethcon spoke. Don't worry, we're keeping our egos in check. Just enough to avoid floating off into space. Ah, excellent. I must admit your little display was most entertaining. The council is impressed with your resourcefulness. Rackham snorted, the sound echoing through the lab. Entertaining, huh? Glad our near-death experiences provide such quality entertainment. Eloan cut in before the back-end fourth could devolve into the usual tit-for-tat. Enough with the flattery, Zethcon. What's next on your agenda? There's talk of strengthening the alliance. Your actions have not gone unnoticed, and the Council sees potential in collaboration, Zethcon replied, smooth as a politician promising change. Lyra's eyebrows shot up. Potential. I'd settle for not being the galaxy's punchline. Baby steps, Lyra, Vex said, giving her a nudge. Let's focus on not getting shot at first, progress. Rackham chimed in, raising an imaginary glass. Indeed, Zethcon continued, unperturbed. The Council is considering formal talks to discuss mutual benefits. Your hybrid food prototype will be the centerpiece of this discussion. Eloan nodded, the weight of the moment not lost on her. We'll be ready. But know this, if this goes south, we're expecting you to pull some strings, of course, Dr. Bryce. Though I do hope it won't come to that, the envoy replied, his voice a blend of sincerity and mischief. The line went dead, leaving a silence that crackled with latent energy. The kind that suggests you're on the brink of something big, but you're not quite sure if it's triumph or catastrophe. So Vex said, breaking the silence. Anyone else feel like we're about to be shoved into the deep end? More like pushed off a cliff, Rackham muttered, his eyes darting to the screens that monitored the Dyson sphere systems. But hey, at least we'll have company when we splat on the rocks below. Eloan sighed, her gaze sweeping over her team. We've got a shot at making something real here. Let's not waste it. With that, they turned back to their work, their earlier camaraderie tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. The air buzzed with anticipation, every click and hum of machinery underscoring the tension that hung in the room. Iors bled into one another, the team's focus unbroken as they prepared for the upcoming talks. The hybrid food prototype was polished to near perfection, every facet of its design scrutinized and refined until it gleamed with promise. It was late, by Dyson sphere standards, when they gathered in the small break room, the lab's harsh fluorescent lights replaced by the subdued glow of a single bulb that stubbornly refused to burn out. Elowen leaned against the counter, a cup of something caffeinated clutched in her hands. "Here's to not screwing up tomorrow," she said, raising her mug in a half-hearted toast. "To not being cosmic fools," Lyra added, clinking her cup against Elowen's. "And maybe, just maybe, getting out of this in one piece," Vex said, joining the impromptu toast. Rackham took a sip of his drink, grimacing as the liquid hit his tongue. "And to the day the universe decides to give us a break," Lyra laughed, the sound bright and full of life. "Yeah, right. And maybe one day pigs will fly, too." With their spirits bolstered by caffeine and gallows humor, the team returned to their tasks, driven by a shared determination to see this through. They were a motley crew, each with their own quirks and flaws, but together they formed a unit that was more than the sum of its parts. The Dyson sphere's humming machinery became a symphony of industry, and for a moment it felt like the world, or what passed for it, had fallen into place. The kind of fragile piece that could shatter at the slightest provocation but was cherished all the same. The next morning, or whatever passed for morning in their perpetual twilight, the team gathered in the main lab, their nerves masked by a veneer of professionalism. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath a reminder of the stakes at hand. Elowen stood at the head of the room, her gaze steady and her voice firm. "All right, everyone. This is it. Let's show them what humanity's made of." "Blood, sweat, and tears," Rackham muttered, earning a snort of laughter from Vex. "And coffee," Lyra added with a grin, holding up her mug like a talisman against disaster. The comms console crackled to life, drawing their attention. Zizith Khan's voice filled the room, the envoy's usual smugness tempered by a hint of formality. "The council is ready. Display the prototype, and we shall begin." With a nod from Elowen, Vex activated the hybrid food prototype, its sleek design and intricate mechanics showcased in a series of holographic displays that filled the room with a soft, ethereal glow. The culmination of weeks of toil, trial, and error, it stood as a testament to their perseverance. "We've synthesized a sustainable food source that's compatible with Glixnar biology, capable of supporting your population without disrupting local ecosystems," Elowen explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd stared down the abyss and come out the other side. The council's response was immediate, their interest palpable through the transmission. Questions flew like darts, probing and precise, each one met with a measured response from Elowen and her team. For once, it felt like they were on solid ground, their preparation paying off in spades. The council's skepticism gradually gave way to cautious optimism, and as the conversation progressed, the possibility of an alliance began to crystallize. Rackham watched the proceedings with the detached air of someone who'd seen too many things go sideways to get too comfortable. Still, even he had to admit there was something exhilarating about being on the cusp of something potentially groundbreaking. As the talks drew to a close, Zizith Khan's voice rang out, a note of genuine respect threading through his words. "You have done well, humans. The Council is impressed with your ingenuity and adaptability. We see great potential in this collaboration." Lyra leaned over to Vex, whispering just loud enough for Rackham to hear. "Did he just compliment us? I didn't think his species was capable of that." "Miracles happen," Vex replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Elowen allowed herself a small smile, the sense of accomplishment buzzing through her veins like an electric current. "We're just glad to be a part of it. Here's to a brighter future, for all of us." With the talks concluded and the alliance solidified, the team found themselves riding a wave of cautious optimism. It wasn't a victory lap just yet, but it was a hell of a lot better than the alternative. As they settled back into their routine, the weight of the past week slowly lifting from their shoulders, the lab hummed with a new energy. The kind that came from knowing they'd made a difference, however small in the grand scheme of things. Rackham watched his teammates with a sense of satisfaction that was rare in their line of work. So, what's next on the agenda? More alien diets to save. Intergalactic peace treat is to broker. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Elowen replied, though her tone was light, the heaviness of the past weeks finally beginning to fade. For now, I think we've earned a breather. Agreed, Lyra said, stretching her arms over her head with a groan. Besides, it's not every day we get to save a species and not die in the process. Vex chuckled, joining Rackham and Lyra at the break room table. And maybe, just maybe, we've proven that humans are good for more than just causing trouble, or surviving it, Rackham added with a grin, kicking back in his chair. They sat together, basking in the aftermath of their efforts, the oppressive weight of uncertainty replaced by a newfound sense of possibility. It was the kind of moment that was all too rare, but when it came, it was worth every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears. Here's to us, Elowen said, raising her mug in a proper toast this time. To defying expectations, Lyra added, clinking her cup against Elowen's. And making it look good while doing it, Vex quipped, his grin infectious. And to whatever comes next, Rackham finished, his voice carrying a note of optimism that was rare for him. They sat together in companionable silence, the Dyson sphere's lights flickering overhead like stars in a distant sky. For once, the universe felt like it might just let them have this moment, a brief respite before the next challenge loomed. And in that quiet, shared victory, the team knew they were ready. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, armed with the knowledge that even against the odds, humanity had a knack for coming out on top.